Meet Reed Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reed is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reed.
Howdy, folks around the globe. Across the United States and from the Gulf to the 51st state, Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio. Let me adjust my pocket. And the Cowboys Take. And this is July 4th, the 250th birthday of the United States. I gave you a quote in yesterday's show, the little update show I did, the interim show, from Benjamin Franklin. We've given you a republic if you can keep it. Apropos. No doubt this is still the #1 country for opportunity and relative freedom in the world. But those freedoms are disappearing, whittled away, in secret, in the fine print, in bills, in policies and regulations. And it's up to us, folks, to maintain that freedom and that independence and that opportunity for our kids, our grandkids, and their children's children. It's all up to us. First of all, the ranch story. So you noticed yesterday I was in my work suit and my cowboy and my baseball hat. That's because we are putting up hay. We have hay. A lot of folks don't. Our hay production, even with our water resources, is down, give or take, about 40%, a little bit more in some fields, a little bit less in others. We're fortunate to have hay at all and pasture, but a lot of folks are going to face a lot of problems this year. A lot of cows are going to have to be sold because you can't pay $400 a ton for hay and not lose your butt if you're a cow operator. One of the things which I think we're going to do today is let you know about what happens in a hay operation. This is the ranch story. We're leading up to what's coming next, which is I think, fascinating historical perspective on what really happened with the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I have an excerpt from one of my previous shows years ago that I think you'll really like and you'll find quite surprising. So in a hay operation, #1, you swathe the hay, you cut the hay. And that is left by the swather in windrows, which are big, long piles of hay. Then you rake the hay once it's dried into larger windrows, and then you run the baler over it, and the baler does square bales, round bales, whatever you happen to do on your operation. On our operation, it's large round bales, 5x5s, weighing 1,200 to 1,300 pounds each. And then, of course, you have to gather them all. You either load your customers in the field, which is the best, and we give a discount for that, or you load the bales from a central hay yard on their semis or what have you. So we are full throttle on that right now, which is why I was in my work getup yesterday. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten a show. I dressed up for the 250th birthday and for you folks. And by the way, I appreciate everybody who's listening. Pass this link on, hit the like button, hit the ring bell so that you know when these shows come out, which is not on a set schedule. And all of that really, really, really helps no matter what platform you're on, and we're on about all of them. I'll remind you, too, that www.ontherightsideradio.com has all the articles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's more information there than on most sites on the internet about everything I talk about in every show. Now, let's get started on our 250th birthday celebration. #1, I hope all of you folks have a terrific weekend. I hope you remember what this day really means. In summary, the United States, I wouldn't say is at a tipping point. It's at a crucial line of demarcation. We're going to decide if we're going to go socialist, and if you see what's happening in the Democratic Communist Party with who's winning primaries, that is the tilt there. And you can see what the result is in Europe and other countries like it. It's never worked, never will. And or we're going to continue down the path that we have been on the last 250 years, and in fact, take away some of the infringements on rights, opportunity, and freedoms that we've experienced over the last 20, 30, 40 years. So this is key, and your role in this is key, okay? None of this is going to happen without you. If you think your elected representatives in Washington get up in the morning, pull on their slippers before they have their coffee and go, what can I do for my constituents today? Well, then you're just plumb loco. So you need to be the voice. You need to write the emails. You need to make the calls. You need to make the campaign contributions, and you need to vote and get other people to vote. I mean, it's up to us. There's no backup here. There's no reserve army. We are the army of freedom. The United States was founded by 57 really, really brave men. And that is the story that's going to follow this little introduction today. I think you will be fascinated. I've brought you other stories on this in the past. Of the 57 men, approximately 40 were killed, or their families were killed, or they died during the Revolutionary War. All of them knew what the stakes were when they affixed their John Henry to the Declaration of Independence. They were automatically traitors to the British Crown. This is guts. This is courage. This is American DNA. And we need to keep that DNA alive, thriving, and expanding. The United States right now is at a crossroads. I think the plans to kind of pull back to the Western Hemisphere and make that our kind of line in the sand are great. I think the Iran conflict, whatever you may think of it, is something that needed to be done and something that no other president had the guts to do. And in the case of Obama, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. Aid and comfort to the enemy. But how it's been, shall we say, moved from kinetic to supposed ceasefire is not so great. I've given you my opinions. This is a show to uplift, not a show to downtrod, so I'm going to keep it there for today. There's lots of great things about this country that we can expand on. There's some things that need fixing that we can fix. Us. Not anybody else, folks. It's us. That's all there is. Okay, we are the front line. We are the people on top of the catapults, on top of the walls. And we are the defense of freedom. I want you to think about this weekend all the great things about this country. And there are many. I don't need to enumerate them here. You know what they are. I want you to think about all the things like from yesterday's show, where I brought you some of these Supreme Court rulings that need fixing. I want you to think about what role you can play in fixing them for your children and your grandchildren and their children's children. You owe it to this country. You owe it to yourself. And you owe it to the next generations to do so. So do it. Without further ado, here is a portion of a show a couple years ago, which I think you will find absolutely fascinating in terms of the real history of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, because, you know, we're celebrating all this today. But it didn't happen on July 4th. And that's all I'm going to say. You'll have to hear the rest of the story next. In the meantime, I'm not going to have a follow-up to that. So you have a great 4th. Think about the things I requested that you think about, and think about what you can do to better this country, preserve our freedoms, preserve our opportunities, and make it a better place for all, particularly our offspring. This is Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take. Enjoy the next segment of this show. Have a very, very happy 4th.
So this week, some of you are hearing this on July 4th, before July 4th, and some of you are hearing it after July 4th. Whenever you're hearing it, I hope that you had or that you will have a terrific holiday. But remember, with the pizza and the beer and the hot dogs and the fireworks and the fun with family and friends, whether you're on the lake or in the mountains or just hanging out at home, we have a republic to save. This is 248 years this July 4th. And the Declaration of Independence, it was signed by 56 of the bravest men who ever walked the planet, and the most insightful men who ever walked the planet. We are the longest living constitutional republic. Now, the question is, will we continue to live, and will we continue to thrive? Right now, the outcome, folks, is in doubt, and it's up to each of us. And what I'm going to do in this show is I'm going to rerun, it's short, but it's powerful, a show I did several years ago on the history of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and the rest of the story, because there is a rest of the story which I think you'll find intriguing. But remember, there is no one behind us. There is no one else to do this. If this republic is to be saved, it is up to us. You better get involved. You better get off the couch. You better write some checks to candidates and for causes. And you better get involved in the election, because the other side is going to pull out all the stops. They know they've committed treason. They know that they have committed crimes. And they know that they will be held accountable, hopefully, finally, if they lose this election. And think with the mind of a thief. Think with the mind of a criminal. If you know you've committed the crimes, and you know that everyone else knows you've committed the crimes, and one last crime might get you off the hook, in this case election fraud, what would you do? If you were that criminal with that criminal mind, what's to lose? Let's go for broke. Because if we win, we won't be held accountable for that or anything before that. Going back a long ways, given the list of people who have committed treason and high crimes against the United States. So you need to be extra vigilant. You need to be writing your state legislatures. You need to be writing your governors. You need to be contributing to causes and to candidates. Go to the Take Action page on the rightsideradio.com. All sorts of multipliers for campaign contributions. If you happen to like a candidate, there's some great outfits that could use your support that are fighting valiantly for your rights. The title of this show is The Fight for Rights, and that's exactly where we're at, folks. We may be in a bigger fight than that. In fact, it may not be just rights. It may be your life. It's certainly your liberty. And as the last few shows where I've discussed their grab for your private property, it is most definitely your property of all types and natures, including whatever types of real estate you might be invested in or own. All right, I'm then going to get into the Supreme Court decisions of the last week, because boy, that was a barn burner of a week for decisions. And all of them, in one way, shape, or form, kind of broke, I don't want to say our way, why don't we say America's way? Except for one. And we'll talk about all those briefly. And the links will be on the website. You can check out the cases for yourself, the discussions on them, the actual rulings by the court. It's really quite fascinating. And we're going to talk a little bit about the left's reaction to that. Actually, it's not the left. It's progressive communists who have unfortunately infiltrated our government while we were asleep at the switch, elected through a combination of election fraud and their useful idiots out there who believe that, Joe Biden is not a cadaver, who believe that there has never been any election fraud, who believe that there is no problem at the southern border, and ad infinitum. You can't reason with them. It's a waste of time. It's the people in the middle, the people who have living brain cells, those Americans who are liberal, not progressive, who are Americans that just happen to think left. We have great common ground with those people because we're all Americans. Well, let me give you the founders' quotes for this week. It's apropos, shall we say. I think we'll go to George Washington. Kind of fitting, right? The father of the country, the first president involved in the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, the general who, against all odds, won the Revolutionary War, the first president of the United States. And I think he summed it up really well. I think it's absolutely salient to this point in our history, this moment in time that I'm talking to you. Quote, "The time is now near at hand which must probably determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves, whether they are to have any property they can call their own, whether their houses or farms are to be pillaged and destroyed, and themselves consigned to a state of wretchedness from which no human efforts will deliver them. The fate of unborn millions will now depend, under God, on the courage and conduct of this army." Unquote. Now, Washington was obviously speaking of the Continental Army, but folks, we are the Army. We're it. There's no one else. There's no one behind us. You can't be looking over your shoulder thinking somebody's going to come to help. Nobody's coming to help. It's up to us. Let's get her done, shall we? All right, the ranch story. Well, actually, it's kind of humorous. So I thought I'd update you on the hay situation, the hay escapades out here, which I kind of gave you a prelude to last week. So we finally kind of got things working, if you will. You know, it is hay season. Things will go wrong, and they will go wrong every day. But I was struck by the fact that there were 4 of us working on the hay, and the weather was iffy. I mean, there was rain, and we had to shut down, and then we had to wait for it to dry because you cannot bale wet grass. Number one, why don't we just say it will ruin its nutrient content over time, and even worse, if wrapped in a bale, wet grass will mold and then become unpalatable to horses or to cows or to whatever critter you're going to feed it to, and the bale will have to be literally burned or thrown out. So we are scrambling around here over the last 5 or 6 days. And the first thing that happened is that the swather hit a rock, and that necessitated some changes to equipment on the cutting edges, obviously. And then the swathing was delayed several times by weather. And finally, and I might add that the folks that were helping us were shorthanded, unfortunately, this year. And finally, all the cutting is done. It was 3 days to get everything cut, dodging storms, waiting for things to dry, etc., etc., etc. Well, we finally get everything cut. And now you have to let the hay dry while it's on the ground. But you can't let it dry too much because that'll ruin the quality of the grass too. And you have the weather considerations, particularly like surprise 10-minute rainstorms that's just enough to shut you down, but not enough, thankfully, to damage the hay. So we finally get the balers out here and the rakers out here. We got all the equipment assembled, and off we go, right? This is the big day. We're going to start churning all those windrows, raking them up into baling windrows, and then baling them, and then moving the bales and stacking the bales. In the meantime, we have a number of hay buyers waiting to pick up their hay and kind of chomping at the bit. No double entendre intended. I was struck by the fact that the 4 of us, once we kind of got in sync, everybody kind of they assumed a task. They weren't assigned a task. It was really kind of a democratic team, if you will. And everybody moved with amazing agility and surprising speed at their chosen tasks. One guy is driving the rake, right behind the rake because it was windy, which also blows over the windrows. That's a whole nother little weather problem that you have. Right behind the rake, I mean like right behind the rake. 20 feet behind the rake is the baler. And we're moving along, and the first 4 bales are spit out of the baler, and all of a sudden, the door on the baler won't close. There's a big door that swings open that rolls out the bales. Anyway, we played with that and lost several hours on that. And finally decided, okay, we're not going to try and fix this baler. It's kind of old. It's a Heston baler. To make a long story short, we absolutely became a well-oiled team. I mean, we were rocking. We were rocking and rolling. And literally in the space of 2 days, despite having to shut down here and there because of the baler, and then one of the guys lost his cell phone, so that was an hour and a half, everybody looking for the cell phone, which we found, which is a miracle, out in the middle of hundreds of acres of hay fields and rolling hills and dales. But in 2 days, we got everything baled, which was great. And the very next day, which happened to be, by the way, today, the day I'm recording this show for you. The first 4 hay buyers showed up, and we were able to load them, in fact, right out of the field, which saves us a bunch of time, energy, fuel, and brain damage, and which they love because they not really get to pick their bales, but they kind of see them from inception, if you. So it all worked out grandly. And the moral of this story is that a well-oiled team, folks who have a common purpose, a common mission, and a common goal, when they put their shoulders together and each of them does their tasks, they will accomplish that goal. And I think you can carry that over to all of us, the 175, 180, 200 million Americans who love America and are concerned about her plight on this July 4th. We are a team. We are not alone. You know, Aaron Lewis's great song, Am I the Only One, which is, by the way, right at the bottom of the homepage of the website if you'd like to listen to it. It's a terrific song. We are not alone, folks. We need to put our shoulders together. We have a common goal, a common mission, and a common purpose, and we need to get her done. And now, let's listen to the history of the Declaration of Independence, which this day celebrates, and the rest of the story. All right, the history of the Declaration of Independence. You know, even after the initial battles in the Revolutionary War broke out, there were very few colonists that desired kind of complete independence from Great Britain, and those who did, like John Adams, were considered radicals. But things changed over the course of the next year. The first battles of the Revolutionary War, April 19th, the Guns of April, Concord and Lexington. But a year later, Britain was attempting to crush the rebels with all the force of its great army. In October 1775, King George railed against the rebellious colonies. He ordered a massive enlargement of the Royal Army and Navy. And in January 1776, when the word of all that reached America, that kind of strengthened the radicals' cause. The same month, the recent British immigrant Thomas Paine, I give you his quotes all the time, published Common Sense, and he argued that independence was a natural right and the only possible course for the colonies. His pamphlet, by the way, Common Sense, sold more than 150,000 copies in the first few weeks in publication. That's like selling millions of copies today. In March of 1776, North Carolina's Revolutionary Convention was the first colony to vote in favor of independence. 7 other colonies had followed suit by mid-May. On June 7th, Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee introduced a motion in the Continental Congress calling for the colony's independence, and this was at the Pennsylvania State House, later known as Independence Hall, in Philadelphia. There was all sorts of heated debate. Congress postponed the vote on Lee's resolution, and the Congress, very torn apart, actually declared a recess. The resolution, by the way, that Richard Henry Lee introduced went like this, quote, resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved, unquote. When Congress adjourned, by the way, squabbling amongst themselves and fearful, on June 11th, they appointed a 5-member committee to draft a public statement that would explain the reasons for declaring independence if they decided to do so. John Adams, Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin, Pennsylvania, Robert R. Livingston of New York, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, and Virginian Thomas Jefferson was that committee. The committee submitted its draft declaration to the Congress on June 28th. That's that famous painting, by the way. That's John Trumbull's famous painting that now hangs in the Capitol Building Rotunda in Washington, D.C. I'm sure you've seen it. Congress debated Lee's resolution on Monday, July 1, 1776. 9 colonies were prepared to vote in favor. The South Carolina and Pennsylvania delegations, however, remained opposed, and the 2 Delaware delegates were deadlocked, 1 for, 1 against. Gee, how American. This is Reed. Here's a flash for you on financial preparedness, and I suggest you listen. The Fed just reported on 2023 the central bank itself lost billions of dollars. In addition, the government stacked $2 trillion in debt burden on the unbelievable debt. Currently, the 2024 debt load is breaking all records. It's going up $1 trillion every 100 days. The government lies, but the numbers don't. These are extremely negative events for your purchasing power. Since 2000 alone, your dollar has declined almost 90% in purchasing power. Gold, on the other hand, is up 7 to 800% as it fluctuates. You can roll over your retirement accounts to a silver or gold-backed IRA or have silver or gold shipped to you. Harvard Gold. I recommend them. Get protected today. Very conservative. Best customer service in the business. Top ratings. Great promotions. Call Harvard Gold Group, silver or gold, at 844-977-GOLD. Ask for your free investment guide. Call 844-977-GOLD or harvardgoldgroup.com. The New York delegates were unable to vote at all, since their instructions permitted them only to pursue reconciliation with the king. But on July 2nd, Caesar Rodney rode into Philadelphia from Dover, Delaware, bringing a tie-breaking vote for Delaware in favor of independence. South Carolina immediately shifted its position in favor. The Pennsylvania opponents chose to, shall we say, temper or stay away from their dissent. And when the vote was called on July 2nd, Lee's resolution passed by a vote of 12-0, with New York abstaining. By the way, that same day, as a little historical side note, July 2nd, British troops under Admiral William Howe landed at Staten Island, preparing for a big battle with Washington's fledgling army. Then, of course, the Congress, being Americans, began debating the Declaration. Editorial revisions, but leaving mostly untouched the soaring rhetoric of Jefferson, who had done 99% of the drafting with some editing by both Ben Franklin and John Adams. On July 4th, the final draft of the Declaration of Independence as we know it was approved. But then we have the rest of the story. On July 9th, New York reversed its earlier instructions to delegates, and they joined the colonies in approving the Declaration of Independence. The colonies were now unanimous, 13 colonies, all in favor of breaking away from Britain. On July 19th, Congress ordered an official copy of the Declaration to be engrossed, written out in large handwriting on parchment for the delegates to sign. On August 2nd, 1776, not July 4th, folks, August 2nd, the Declaration of Independence was signed. And the mood in the room was not jubilant. Everybody was aware of the magnitude of what they were undertaking. This fledgling set of colonies in wilderness, taking on the greatest empire on the planet Earth. And they knew that this would be considered an act of high treason against the British Crown that could cost every man his life. And indeed, of the 57 signers, more than 2/3 died at some point during the Revolution or saw their families or plantations destroyed. I've brought you those stories on previous July 4th. I may bring it to you again. Recalling that day many years later, Pennsylvania's Benjamin Rush, a delegate, he kind of wrote of the, quote, pensive and awful silence which pervaded the House when we were called up, one after another, to the table of the President of Congress, which was John Hancock, to sign, quote, what was believed by many at that time to be our own death warrants. This is also when all these incredibly courageous men pledged to their country, their new fledgling infant embryonic country, and to themselves, their faith, their families, their fortune, and their sacred honor. But the rest of the story, folks, is that the Declaration of Independence was not signed on July 4th. It was signed on August 2nd. And in fact, 7 members of the Continental Congress signed thereafter. And thank you, founders, from one American to all of you from so long ago, for having the vision and the foresight and the inspiration to found this great country of ours. And in the future, folks, even keeping in mind the rest of the story, remember the preamble that Jefferson wrote to this incredible document, one of the 3 corners of the American Republic. No, not a democracy, a representative republic. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence. Quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Unquote. Keep that in mind as you listen to today's show. We need to exercise those voices. You need to stand up. We need to stand up. It is our turn, our time to preserve liberty.
Please remember, if you've missed any shows, just click on Show Archive and you'll find all of his shows. We look forward to seeing you here again next week for another episode of Read Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.